like C-level API calls, they should be abstracted in such a way that allows their dynamic execution. So transport independent could be over a socket, for example, and this would effectively replace AGI. Instead of seeing AGI send one command at a time, you would see it send the telephony building blocks, and therefore allow a much more robust system. For this, AMI needs to change. It's a huge these are all huge undertakings. They're like completely radical changes to Asterisk. But I think that, you know, over my 2 years of abstracting Asterisk and hearing the constraints from the marketplace, basically, I think these are what's most crucially needed for the future of Asterisk and achieving that tipping point. So AMI needs to be changed to some kind of event system which is extensible so that you could have, say, a cluster work with certain events. And a lot of people store state with Asterisk by plugging into the manager interface and then writing to a database or something. State should be storage medium independent and accessible across the network, say, for the purpose of clustering. So by basically reaching the entire long tail, the focus of Asterisk changes from the PBX big head approach to the approach that targets everything. And it can certainly still cater to the PBX market, but only by distributing an Asterisk PBX application with it. And for that, you would have to, say, have voicemail queues, agents, all of that implemented in some more higher level abstractions. And, you know, people definitely want the ability to change voicemail or change queues, change agents as they need it. A lot of these applications are like fundamentally impossible on Asterisk without modifying it to some extent. And by having these atomic telephony building blocks, you're basically creating what Asterisk would have internally. So with those changes I mentioned, everyone's happy, chasm crossed, Balmer beaten. You get cheesy keynote effects. But I'd like to, at the end of this talk, hear your concerns about this. And these are a couple things that I think you guys are going to bring up. One is the selection of a general purpose programming language. And I use Ruby. A lot of people don't use Ruby. A lot of people use Perl, especially in the Asterisk scene. What if they want to use Perl? What if they want to use Java? It becomes a religious debate. And by having these telephony building blocks defined, the language could be independent. Another problem is the programming language isn't embeddable. Java's not embeddable. Ruby's not very embeddable without a lot of custom code. So, you know, at this point, you know, either run it over a socket or, in the sake of Ruby, create your own global interpreter lock that makes sure that things are thread safe.
What if we just pick C as the language?
No one would use it. No one would. To achieve a tipping point, you have to allow, say, code reuse. You have to. Here, I'll go back to what developers want.
Also, how do these blocks communicate?
The blocks communicate through the code with which it's written. For example, if you write the blocks in C, if you write them in Ruby, if you write them in Java, they would say, you know, like, basically the blocks would have to be constructed in a way similar to assembler, like register-based, for example. So you have a higher level abstraction of a telephony building block that, say, like, basically instantiate a new channel. And you assign that to a variable in your, like, Ruby code. Okay. And through, like, within your code, you can basically perform any operations on that and, you know, so execute more building blocks.
Becomes pretty much an API.
Totally, totally.
I know what you're saying.
But, and yeah, and it's actually a little bit more lower level than an API. It would be something that allows APIs to be written with it. So it's something that's very, very low level, but specific to the telephony domain, a la assembler.
Telephony API.
Sorry?
Kind of like a low-level telephony API.
Yeah,
Kind of
yeah.
API.
But the idea is that you would never have to drop down to C to write a voicemail application. You could always write it in a higher level abstraction that can basically get the full benefit of the C API to Asterisk. And that's a big problem that a lot of third-party application developers encounter.
So if you're doing it on something like Erlang, I mean, you can
Sure.
always have C and as a C port, and you can connect it up. C libraries can be used in
Yeah,
languages.
yeah, you could. And Erlang could work really well over the socket. With a port,
No, Erlang
yeah.
has a thing called ports. So.
No, I know Erlang, yeah. A lot of people write like, C extensions to Erlang, which may also work as well. So does that answer your question about how people could execute the building blocks?
Block is, so, I mean, when you said it's kind of like an API. Kind of.
Yeah, it is. And if, for example, in Adhearsion, if there were a telephony building block like foundation, I would never actually be like sending it opcodes like in my, say, dial plan. There would be many layers of abstraction within the framework that I could use, but the most common usage cases would be to use the more higher level abstractions of it. For example, like dial. That's probably, like 30, 40, 50 telephony building blocks, but it's abstracted in such a way that the one method I have to call actually calls 10 methods, which, represent the remainder of the...
But that wouldn't really need Asterisk to change, right? Because Asterisk is after all in C, so you could
The thing that needs to change within Asterisk is the exposure of the C API to be more atomic.
You don't build it into an executable. You could build Asterisk into a library and then have your own library linked with it, which gives you like maybe higher level things, like a dial command.
You could certainly have high level things through a C API, but you don't have telephony building blocks. For example, what if you wanted to change like how music on hold works?
You could
like you would have to basically recompile your custom music on hold like solution, and it should be much more dynamic than that. You should be able to at runtime like redefine how music on hold works.
Couldn't you just take Asterisk source code and build it into a library?
Build it into a library. Well, that kind of goes back to what I just said about.
You could have the headers exposed and just like someone could use Asterisk library and use all the functions that Asterisk defines internally before.
I guess my point is you could certainly do that, but you would have to have the telephony fundamentals basically all represented in that header file, right?
Yeah.
If the Asterisk C API was changed in such a way that had all of that, yeah, you could absolutely do that. And that would be a very efficient way of executing the telephony blocks. You could still have voicemail in Asterisk written in C, but that C is programmatically generated from a higher level abstraction that calls those telephony building blocks. Does that make sense?
Voicemail apps and stuff would have to be chopped up into smaller blocks.
Yeah, yeah. So I got on this rant because Mark asked why don't we just write everything in C, and I went back to the slide about what Asterisk developers really want. There are a lot of people that don't want to use C. I mean, reliability is just one good reason. If people write bad C code, there are huge issues. Huge issues. You could segfault Asterisk, which is totally not a good thing. With, say, an abstracted application written in a higher level programming language that's over a socket, that's never going to crash Asterisk unless there's some bug in Asterisk. Integration with everything, that kind of goes into like the difficulty with C, because basically C is not as efficient in developer cycles as a lot of more higher level programming languages.